Hey, everybody. Bo Prosser here, Center for Christian Education, and my buddy Ruben Swint, the generosity guy. We are beginning a series of uh, videos for you to develop some ideas around year round generosity and stewardship. Ruben, thanks for joining me. Always a pleasure to work with you, my friend.
Excited to be with you, Bo. I'm looking forward to this series we're doing.
So, we're talking about year round generosity and stewardship. What do you hope for us to accomplish in these sets of videos?
Well, Bo and I are offering for you a year-round approach which has specific actions you can take each month of the year with options each month. You will see a lot of information from us. That doesn't mean you have to attempt everything, but consider each month's offering as a menu and choose what is doable in your situation and realize all of these can be repeated on an annual basis. So I'm looking forward to talking about January.
All right, let's look at January and see uh, what we can do here. There's lots of post-it notes here for us to do in January. The first thing you suggest is assemble a team.
I do. For what Bo and I are recommending, you will need a particular type of team. You'll need a team that is developed or that is accumulative, that consists of storytellers. So don't just absorb the finance committee from your church and give them another assignment, but go out and look for people with creative talents and skills. And I'm talking about visual talents, verbal skills, dramatic arts experience, even graphic artists. And these are the type of people who will serve best on a team that will enter into this year-round approach to generosity and stewardship.
Lots of churches now have a finance committee, but then they also have a stewardship team or a generosity committee. So that could be the group that begins to do this.
It could be if they include these creative talents on their team.
Absolutely. So then the first thing you suggest is analyzing past years' trends. Maybe it's 1 year, maybe it's 3 to 5 years, but we're trying to establish some baseline so that we can figure out how money flows, how people give, and how people serve. So, what are we looking for, and who should be doing this analysis?
That's a great question. Uh, I think you would have to incorporate some information and input from a finance team. But what I'm mainly concerned about, interested in, is how the money flowed. Were there low months in terms of giving? Were there strong months in terms of giving? Uh, was your congregation like many churches and you got 25% of your annual gifts in December? Uh, that's not unusual with the congregations I've worked with. I'm
Yes.
also interested in the kinds of gifts that came in, cash gifts, electronic fund transfer, uh, debit into checking accounts, stock gifts, and did you receive any estate gifts during the year? Uh, what were the trends that you saw in terms of giving, up and down, types of gifts, but also volunteer serving hours? That is a tremendous value to your congregation as you carry out ministry. The last I saw, a volunteer hour was worth $17. So if you can estimate hours times $17, that's another significant receipt that came into your church for funding ministry. I would like to know where you've been, where you are right now, and then you can do some good projections moving forward.
So then we're ready to set some benchmarks, uh, some goal settings that are smart, that are measurable, that are actually attainable and realistic within the life of the church. We're not going to try to double the budget in a year, but we might try to increase within a percentage or two. We want to pay attention to economic factors around us. We want to pay attention to inflation. We want to pay
Yes.
attention to what's happening in our community. So, what should we be looking at as we set these benchmarks?
Well, I think as a minimum, you want to meet the inflationary increase in prices for delivering ministry. If you're within 1 or 2% increase for next year, you may not cover all of the costs that inflation is going to throw your way, unintended. Uh, so that's a big concern. One other thing is a lot of times you don't have to, from your congregation alone, develop all the funding for a ministry. You may consider strategic partnerships where you, with another church or a nonprofit with a faith-based orientation, can do something together, and it doesn't require your congregation funding all of it.
Absolutely. So then we move to telling the story, and there are several different ways that you suggest we do that. The first is producing an annual report. Maybe not the glossy magazine that we're used to seeing, but some kind of report that takes advantage of the gifts on the stewardship team that we've already committed and enlisted, who are going to help us tell the story with pictures, help us tell the story with words, help us tell the story with images. What do we want to talk about in the annual report?
I think primarily the annual report is heavy on examples of life change that occurred because your congregation was involved in ministry to help people, to heal people, to save people. And there was some financial support for all of that. So I would be heavy on testimony, ministry examples. I would be light on financial charts and trends because at the end of the day, the finances are a way to do ministry. They're not the sole goal of what you're trying to achieve. They are the funding source, but ministry is how we measure how we're doing in terms of carrying out our mission.
And so after we produce this report, and it may just be a front and back copied page of some of our successes and some of the things we maybe didn't get to do because of different uh, influences upon our congregation, you also suggest that the pastor share a state of the church sermon and that we begin to introduce ministry priorities for the coming year. You call this the gospel of good giving. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. Giving is a good behavior. It's good for the giver and it's good for the receiver. And I think what we want to do is show our members in the pews that the church is involved in that. And this is how it's involved in that. And also say this is how we're going to focus our resources in this coming year, both in terms of our giving and our volunteer hours that we're contributing.
So, uh, most people are going to look at this late January and they're going to say, "Well, we're already a month behind. What in the world do you expect us? You expect us to go do all this now? What in the world? What advice would you give folks who are seeing this towards the end of the month as we move into this year-round sharing of information?"
First, I guess I want to say is some of you listening to this video may have already done some of these items because you were ahead of the game. You were ahead of Bo and me. But pick 1 or 2 items that you know you can get done and you can do it well and move forward. The other items that we've not given you enough time to attend to, they'll be there next January and you can look at them then.
Or they'll even be available to you as you move into February and you can play catch up a little bit.
True.
However, February is a most important month, at least in your eyes, for this ongoing annual stewardship and generosity development. What's so important about February?
Well, one, there's not a lot of competition for emphases happening in February, if you will. February's kind of a slow month, if you will, and it's the perfect month for talking about something that's rarely talked about in our churches, but can make a really big difference in terms of funding your ministry. And I would recommend February become Make Your Will Month in your congregation. Everybody needs a will, young adult, middle adult, senior adults. Some states have already written a will for your family unless you have your own will. And it will be the state's will that presides over the disposal of your assets unless you have a will yourself that records your intentions of how those assets will be disposed. Um, a lot of times, an emphasis called planned giving, which means thoughtful giving, strategic giving, comes into the will making emphasis. And I consider planned giving the long game because if you decide to talk about how a person or a couple can give through their will or their estate, and they make a decision that they're going to do that to release assets from their estate once they've graduated from life on this earth, then you're playing the long game. It will take years before you see a receipt from that family or that individual, but that receipt, that gift will be much larger than their normal contributions. And so you just have to wait. But most congregations that I talk with, the reason they bring me in to talk about planned giving is says we needed to have started this 15 years ago because the last 2 years we've seen significant giving opportunities uh, pass away, and we got nothing from the estates of those fully devoted Christians. They didn't
And
know that we wanted or would receive a gift.
we are
So
in the middle of the largest transfer of wealth ever experienced in the world. And churches need to be out front of that.
absolutely. I would schedule a workshop for all ages, young, middle, and senior adults. Young adults, because they need to have a will. That's the foundation of building a good financial plan throughout their lives. Middle adults for their own security, peace of mind as they're thinking more about retirement. They also have parents who have retired and are probably nearing the end of their lifetimes who need good estate documents to dispose of their assets the way they want. And then for your senior adults as well. All right, and Bo, you've done these too. We've done conferences in churches about estate planning, and I've always had good experiences doing that, and I've had opportunity to meet with people singly afterwards and answer specific questions. The one thing I don't want the church to do is set itself up as providing advice from a financial perspective. So be sure to engage or have your members engage legal professional advice that is good and sound and authenticated. But we'd be happy to do that for any church that was interested in it.
Absolutely. You and I are coaches. We're not advisors.
Right.
And we are always willing to go and share our advice and our insights. But we certainly aren't investment advisors, at least at this point. We are not. So, not only do we talk about wills and planned giving and give some information, but we also have to be ready for planned receiving because nothing can tear up a fellowship of a church faster than the church receiving this large bequest and then having 100 people with ideas about how to spend that money or how to save that money. So, how do we get ready for this?
Well, I like gaming out a scenario. In other words, pretend that a lawyer has called your church and informed the church that their departed deceased client has left the church $2 million. And they want to
Glory.
know to whom to make the check and where is the address to send it. What are you going to do with that? I will promise you, it is always best to have thought through that ahead of time and to know how you would have used such an amount of money, not only to carry out your mission, but to do some other things beyond your particular mission as well, in cooperation with others. And Bo, you're exactly right. When large sums come unexpected, for some reason, they pull the emotional levers rather than the logical levers. And people started running around a little differently, a little crazy, if you will. So the best thing to do is sit down and say, if we were to receive $1 million, 2 million, doesn't matter the amount, but a large amount, how would we want to use that? And to kind of have some preliminary plans in place. In other words, do not open this document until you receive a large gift kind of plan, and then be prepared to go ahead. You may want to create endowment funds. A lot of churches, many of them, their endowment funds came from bequest gifts, estate plan gifts that way. But you don't want to wind up with 12 to 20 different endowment funds to manage and to keep up with. And you don't want to have, like one church, an endowment fund for putting flowers on the church Lord's Supper table every Sunday. That became so large because they couldn't spend all the income that they expanded that into landscaping the grounds, which they now do every 5 to 7 years because they still have all this income they can't expend. The best thing to do is to limit the opportunities for endowment funds to a few critical strategic funds. I like a general endowment fund that can be used for unanticipated needs, a building maintenance or a capital fund, maybe to help with building new buildings, and then also a missions fund. Missions, maybe missions and ministry for local ministry. These things you're always going to be involved in. Uh, so conversations with donors ahead of time help. That's why the workshop's important, because you can kind of lay that out during the workshop. So you won't get a planned gift or an endowment fund for something that's not even related to your mission. Can you imagine? That's
Absolutely.
terrible to happen that way.
I know several churches that are uh, just stuck because money was given for the church graveyard. And the church graveyard doesn't need but a little bit of work, but there's 300, $400,000 in that fund, and it can't be used for anything except what it was given for. And so I suggest your endowment funds being very general. So along the lines that you've already outlined, the graveyard money could be in the maintenance bucket, if you will,
Absolutely.
but we wouldn't be restricting a large amount of money for a very specific source
Right.
of work. So then it's the job of the endowment committee or the finance committee or whoever manages those funds to make sure you're reporting fairly, openly, transparently to let everybody
Yeah.
know where the money's going, how the money's being received, and what the plans are going down the road. So that takes us into March, and you've got us in some book studies or some group learning or something. Tell us a little bit about these resources.
I like the month of March for doing some resource study, if you will. There's a Bible study available free from the Church Network. You can find them online. They are the National Association of Church Business Administrators. And there they have a Bible study that I wrote called Relational Generosity, which recognizes the fact that relationships are at the heart of the gospel and they're also at the heart of giving. And I've heard very good comments about this approach to generosity from a Bible study perspective. A devotional guide that I really like a lot, and I've used this in capital campaigns and also annual stewardship promotion, is called Extravagant Generosity. And this is by Bishop Robert Schnace, a Methodist bishop, and the resource is available through Cokesbury. And it is excellent. It's 40 days of generosity scripture and devotionals. And it could actually be paired as with Lent as a way to enter the season of Lent, just to study and reflect on what generosity means, especially during Lent when we're anticipating Easter, which is God's great gift of generosity to mankind. And then finally, a more I guess, conventional approach, not necessarily religious, but written by two Christians, is the generosity factor, a little novella, if you will, small book. You may be familiar with Ken Blanchard's work with 1 Minute Manager. This is a book about the same size, about 80, 90 pages, but he paired up with Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A and a very committed layman and steward. And it's talking about how generosity can open up avenues of life in unexpected ways. They can bless the person being generous, and they certainly bless the persons who are recipients of generosity. And this would be what I call kind of a book club approach, to have groups reading this book at the same time. And maybe you organize 5 to 8 different book clubs, and 2 book clubs take some books and read them. And then once they finish, the next series of book groups take the books and read them. And you just do that throughout the year as you have time.
And this would certainly be something that could also be an alternative Sunday school class, perhaps.
Well, it could,
Uh,
absolutely.
Also, Henry Nouwen has a very fine workbook that is available on the spirituality of generosity. That's available through Upper Room. That you might want to take your stewardship team to do some study in that.
Right.
Heavily based on prayer and the willingness to ask as prompted by the Spirit, and a wonderful, wonderful
That's correct.
workbook that it's available to you. So the first quarter is in the books, and we are done now. And now we got to get ready for April, May, June, because this is a year round kind of approach, and there's always something to be done helping people live into the call to be good stewards and generous stewards in the life of our church. We would remind you there's a presentation handout to accompany this video. The PowerPoint slides are also available to you. The next video will be coming soon, and it will be early enough that you can get in front of April, May, and June. Also, our emails are here if you need us. Ruben and I are always available for follow-up conversations, Q&A, or to come and do a workshop for you at your church, whatever your
Absolutely.
might be. Ruben, it's always a pleasure working with you. I'm grateful for you, my friend. Any last
Thank you.
words you would share with us?
Well, Bo and I do this because we love it. We are so grateful that we can be involved in this kind of ministry enhancement to congregational ministry. So we don't always need to get paid. You can have just one question and you want it answered, call us. We'll be glad to have a conversation. And if you want a longer engagement, that's up to you. But we're delighted to be able to have this kind of input into what your congregation is attempting to do. And we just wish you the best.
Ruben Swint, the generosity guy, as always. Thanks for sharing. Bo Prosser, BoProsser.com, the Center for Christian Education. Bo and the Beard, thanks for joining us. Keep that generosity in front of your folks. And until we see you again, keep on rocking.